What if the world saw you as nothing? In the cold, sterile light of a courtroom, a woman sits in complete silence as her marriage is dissolved, stripped of her dignity and her future. Her powerful husband smirks, victorious. She walks away with nothing but the clothes on her back, a ghost in her own life. But what if that silence wasn't weakness? What if it was the quiet before a storm? Days later, a single announcement sends shockwaves through the elite world. This same forgotten woman is now the sole heiress to an unimaginable fortune. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story of devastating betrayal, hidden motives, and the terrifying, exhilarating journey of a woman reclaiming her power. The courtroom was a study in beige and muted browns, a deliberate color palette designed to leach emotion from human tragedy. It smelled of old paper and the faint, antiseptic tang of cleaning fluid. For Claire Sterling, it was the color of her life now, drained, neutral, and utterly forgettable. She sat perfectly still at the defendant's table, her hands folded over the worn polyester of her only good blazer. Her lawyer, a public defender named Ms. Cho, whose exhaustion seemed to radiate from her like heat, had prepped her for this. Don't react, Claire. Whatever he says, whatever his lawyer implies, you stay quiet. It's the fastest way to make it end. And Claire wanted it to end. The past 6 months had been a slow, methodical dissection of her life, her character, her very soul. Across the aisle, her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, Damien Thorne, looked magnificent. His suit was a custom-tailored charcoal grey that probably cost more than her apartment's security deposit. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his jawline sharp and confident. He leaned over to whisper something to his lawyer. A shark in a silk tie named Lawrence and a low chuckle rumbled between them. They looked like victors dividing the spoils, and she, Claire, was the spoils. "Mrs. Sterling," Lawrence began, his voice smooth and condescending as he addressed the judge, "has agreed to all terms of the dissolution. She makes no claim on Mr. Thorne's assets, his properties, or his ongoing business ventures. She asks for no alimony, no spousal support. She wishes only to dissolve the union and return to her maiden name." The judge, a woman with weary eyes and a face etched with the stories of 1,000 broken families, peered down at Claire over her spectacles. "Ms. Sterling, you understand what this means. After 12 years of marriage, you are walking away with nothing?" Claire's throat was a desert. She could feel Damien's gaze on her, a physical weight of smug satisfaction. He was enjoying this public demonstration of her complete and utter defeat. He had told her during one of their last screaming matches in their cavernous minimalist penthouse that she was nothing without him. "You were a community college librarian when I found you, Claire. I gave you everything. Without me, you'll be back to shelving dusty books and eating canned soup for dinner." He wasn't wrong. He had systematically isolated her from her old friends, convinced her that her job was unimportant, and made her world revolve entirely around his. And then, when he'd grown bored of her quiet devotion, he had shattered that world with the casual cruelty of a child kicking over a sandcastle. She met the judge's eyes. The script was simple. One word. Ms. Cho had written it on a notepad for her. Yes. She opened her mouth, the sound a dry crackle. "Yes, Your Honor." Damien's lawyer smirked. "As you can see, the separation is amicable and straightforward. A clean break, like an amputation without anesthetic." Claire's mind drifted, a defense mechanism against the sterile finality of the room. She thought of their early days, the whirlwind romance, the way Damien had looked at her like she was a masterpiece he had just discovered. He'd loved her quiet nature then, calling it a calm harbor in his chaotic life as a rising tech mogul. But over the years he had reframed her virtues as flaws. Her calm became passivity. Her contentment became a lack of ambition. Her love for simple things, like walking in the park or visiting old bookstores, became a provincial embarrassment. The final betrayal wasn't another woman. That would have been too simple, too human. The final betrayal was his utter indifference. He had announced his decision to divorce her over a catered dinner for his investors, mentioning it as a casual aside, as if discussing a minor stock fluctuation. "Claire and I will be parting ways. It's for the best. Allows me to focus more on the Thorn Industries expansion." She had become a line item on his balance sheet, a liability to be cleared. The judge's gavel struck the woodblock. The sound was flat, definitive. It echoed in the silent room, the punctuation mark at the end of her life's longest chapter. The marriage between Damien Thorn and Claire Sterling is hereby dissolved. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She felt a profound, hollow emptiness, a vacuum where a heart should be. Ms. Cho gave her a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. Across the room, Damien stood up, buttoning his jacket. He shot a triumphant look in her direction, a look that said, "See? You are nothing." He didn't even have the decency to approach her. He simply turned and walked away, his expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum, the sound of him striding into his bright, shiny future, leaving her in the beige ruins of their past. She remained seated long after he was gone. The courtroom slowly emptied, the low murmur of voices fading until it was just her and Ms. Cho. "Are you okay?" the lawyer asked, her voice softer now. Claire finally looked at her. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a betrayal of her hard-won composure. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "I just want to go home," she whispered. But she didn't have a home. The penthouse had been his. The life had been his. All she had was a small rented room in a run-down part of the city, filled with second-hand furniture and the suffocating scent of someone else's memories. She walked out of the courthouse, blinking against the harsh afternoon sun. The world felt too loud, too bright, too full of life. She pulled the collar of her cheap blazer tighter, a fragile shield against a world she no longer knew how to navigate, and disappeared into the anonymous afternoon crowd, a silent woman erased from her own story. The apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up in the Mission District, a neighborhood thrumming with a vibrant, chaotic energy that felt alien to Claire. The walls were thin, and the scent of frying onions from the apartment below was a permanent resident. It was a world away from the climate-controlled, scent-diffused air of the penthouse overlooking the bay, where the only sound had been the distant hum of the city and the whisper of Damien's disapproval. This shoebox-sized room was her entire world now. A lumpy mattress on the floor, a wobbly card table with a single chair, and a hot plate that took 20 minutes to boil water. Every object was a testament to her failure. The chipped coffee mug, a donation from her landlady. The threadbare towel that never seemed to fully dry. She was living the life Damien had predicted for her, a grim prophecy fulfilled. For the first few days after the divorce, she did little more than stare at the water-stained ceiling, tracing the intricate patterns of decay with her eyes. The silence in the room was a living entity, an echo chamber for her thoughts, and they were relentlessly cruel. He was right. You are nothing. 12 years? Wasted. You let him do this to you. You let him erase you. Her past felt like a movie she'd watched about someone else's life. She remembered hosting lavish charity galas, her smile a carefully constructed mask as she mingled with San Francisco's elite. She remembered the trips to Milan for Fashion Week, where Damien would parade her around like a new acquisition. But even in those glossy memories, she could now see the cracks. The way he would correct her in front of his friends, a subtle power play disguised as a joke. The way he would dismiss her opinions on art or literature with a condescending pat on the hand. He hadn't just controlled her, he had curated her, editing out the parts of her personality he found inconvenient, until all that was left was a pleasing, silent reflection of his own success. To survive, she fell back on the ghost of her former self, the quiet librarian. She found a part-time, unpaid volunteer position at a small, dusty book restoration workshop run by a historical society. It was a refuge. The smell of aging paper, beeswax and leather was a balm to her frayed nerves. The work was meticulous and calming, mending torn pages, restitching bindings, carefully cleaning centuries-old leather covers. It was the opposite of her life with Damien. Here she was restoring things, not being torn apart. It was there, months before the divorce, that she had met Silas Blackwood. He wasn't a volunteer, just a frequent visitor, a tall, stooped man with kind, watery blue eyes and hands gnarled with age. He would sit for hours at a small table reading rare first editions, his brow furrowed in concentration. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice was a low, gentle rumble. He'd ask her about her work, about the specific challenges of restoring a water-damaged manuscript or a book whose spine had been completely broken. He listened with an intensity that was unnerving at first. It had been years since anyone, especially a man, had listened to her with such genuine interest. Their conversations were never about anything personal. They spoke of paper quality, of the beauty of a particular font, of the stories the books themselves told through their wear and tear. He saw the passion she had for the work, a passion she thought Damien had extinguished long ago. "You have a gentle touch," he'd told her one afternoon, watching her carefully apply adhesive to a detached page. "You respect the history. It's a rare quality." His simple compliment had felt like a lifeline. He saw her, the real her, not the polished wife of Damien Thorne. When she stopped showing up at the workshop after Damien filed for divorce, she assumed he had simply forgotten about her, another quiet passerby in his long life. One Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after the gavel had fallen, her cheap pay-as-you-go phone buzzed on the card table. The number was unfamiliar, a downtown San Francisco area code. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. With a sigh, she answered, expecting a telemarketer. "Is this Ms. Claire Sterling?" a man's voice asked. It was formal, crisp. "Yes," she said, her own voice raspy from disuse. "My name is Arthur Abernathy. I am the executor of the estate of the late Silas Blackwood. I am calling to request an urgent meeting with you at your earliest convenience." The name hit her like a physical blow. Silas. Dead. She felt a pang of genuine sorrow. The kind old man from the bookshop was gone. I'm sorry to hear that," she stammered. "But I think you have the wrong person. I barely knew Mr. Blackwood." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the dry rustle of paper. "Miss Sterling," Mr. Abernathy said, his tone unwavering. "According to the legal document in my possession, signed by Mr. Blackwood 1 month ago, you knew him well enough. He has named you as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. I believe it is imperative that we meet." Claire's mind went blank. It felt like a cruel prank, a crossed wire, a case of mistaken identity. Sole beneficiary, that's impossible. He must have family, friends. I was just the volunteer at the book bindery. "He had no living relatives," the lawyer replied patiently. "And as for his friends, it seems he considered you the most significant of them all. Our office is on Montgomery Street. Would tomorrow at 10 a.m. be suitable?" Claire sank onto her lumpy mattress, the phone feeling slick in her suddenly sweaty palm. The room, with its stained ceiling and the smell of onions, seemed to tilt on its axis. Nothing made sense. The world she knew, the small, broken world she had just started to accept, had just been fractured by a voice on the phone and a name from the past. Her echo chamber had been shattered, and in its place was a ringing, deafening question. Why? The law offices of Abernathy, Cole and Finch were located in a historic building in the financial district, a temple of old money and quiet power. The lobby was a hushed space of dark mahogany, polished brass, and the scent of lemon oil. It was a world Claire had once inhabited as a guest, always on Damien's arm, but entering it alone, dressed in her best second-hand clothes, she felt like an imposter. Her worn flats made no sound on the thick Persian rug as she was led to Mr. Abernathy's office. Arthur Abernathy was exactly as his voice had suggested, a man in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair, a crisp suit and an air of unimpeachable gravitas. His office overlooked the city, but the blinds were partially drawn, casting the room in a somber, respectful light. He stood as she entered, gesturing to a plush leather armchair that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. "Ms. Sterling, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, his eyes kind but professionally distant. "Mr. Abernathy," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, "I'm still convinced there's been a terrible mistake." He sat down behind his immense desk, a surface so clean and organized it seemed less like a workspace and more like a museum exhibit. He folded his hands. "I assure you, there is no mistake. Silas was a client of mine for over 40 years. He was meticulous in all things, especially his final wishes. He was also a very private man. His circle was exceedingly small." Claire's mind was racing. Private? She had assumed Silas was just a lonely old bibliophile. The idea that he was a man of means, let alone significant wealth, seemed preposterous. "But why me? We talked about books, that's all." Mr. Abernathy slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished wood. Her name was written on the front in a spidery, elegant script she recognized instantly as Silas's. "He left this for you. He believed it would explain things better than I ever could." With trembling fingers, she took the letter and opened it. The paper was heavy, expensive. "My dear Claire," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I have finally surrendered to time's relentless march. Do not mourn me. I have lived a long and, for the most part, contented life. I am writing to you because, in the final years of that life, your quiet presence became a source of unexpected joy. You will no doubt be shocked by the contents of my will. People will call you a schemer, a gold digger. They will not understand. Let them talk. Their opinions are the rustling of dry leaves in the wind, meaningless. I did not accumulate my fortune. I inherited it, much as you are about to. It was built by my father, a man who believed that money was a fortress. He lived his life within its walls, and it was a lonely existence. For many years, I did the same. I watched the world from a distance, becoming a spectator in my own life. I collected things, companies, properties, art, and of course books. But I never truly connected with people. Then I started visiting the workshop. I watched you work. I saw the care, the patience, the reverence you had for these broken things. You didn't see them for their monetary value, but for the stories they held. You were mending them, making them whole again, and when we spoke, you looked me in the eye. You were not interested in who I was, but in what I thought. In this city, a city built on networking and calculating the value of every human interaction, your simple, unassuming kindness was the rarest commodity of all. I also saw the sadness in your eyes, a shadow you tried so hard to hide. I never pried, but I suspected you were in a gilded cage. I saw you diminishing, week by week, your light growing dimmer. Then you were gone. I made some discreet inquiries. I learned of your divorce, of the cruel and total manner in which you were discarded. This inheritance is not a gift, Claire. It is a tool. It is a key. Use it to unlock the cage you were put in. Use it to build a life of your own design, not one dictated by another. Use it to restore what was broken, not just old books, but your own spirit. Be well, be free. Your friend, Silas Blackwood. Claire finished the letter, tears blurring the final words. The letter was a revelation, a validation she didn't know she desperately needed. Someone had seen her, someone had understood. The hollow space inside her chest ached with a mixture of profound grief and overwhelming gratitude. He was, she trailed off, unable to find the words. He was a keen observer of character, Mr. Abernathy finished for her, his voice gentle. He pushed a second document towards her. It was the will. She scanned the legalese, the formal jargon, but the numbers were impossible to ignore. Stocks in blue-chip companies. Real estate holdings in San Francisco, New York, and London. a portfolio of art and rare books, and a liquid asset fund with a number so large it seemed typographical error. "The total value of the Blackwood estate," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice calm and steady, "is estimated to be in the region of $2.7 billion. The air rushed out of Claire's lungs. 2.7 billion. It wasn't a number, it was an alternate reality. The room began to spin. Her life as a divorced, destitute woman in a tiny apartment, the life of canned soup and threadbare towels, seemed to evaporate like a dream upon waking. But the feeling wasn't joy. It was vertigo. It was terror. This wasn't a tool. It was a mountain crashing down on top of her. I can't," she stammered, shaking her head, pushing the will away from her. "This is too much. I don't know how to manage any of this." "You won't have to do it alone," Mr. Abernathy assured her. "Silas established a board of financial advisors, lawyers and accountants to manage the portfolio. Your only role, at least initially, is to be the owner, to make the final decisions, the first of which is accepting the inheritance." Accepting. It was a choice. She could say no. She could walk out of this office, back to her tiny room, back to the comfortable misery she understood. It was a tempting thought. This new world was terrifying, full of responsibilities and expectations she couldn't possibly meet. But then she thought of Silas's letter. Use it to restore what was broken. She thought of Damien's smug, triumphant face in the courtroom. "You are nothing without me." A tremor went through her, a seismic shift deep in her soul. It wasn't the shaking of fear anymore. It was the first faint vibration of something else, something that felt dangerously like strength. She looked Mr. Abernathy in the eye, her own gaze clear for the first time in years. "I accept." Damien Thorne was enjoying a celebratory scotch at an exclusive rooftop bar, the city lights of San Francisco glittering below like a carpet of diamonds. The divorce was final. He'd successfully excised the dead weight from his life. Claire, with her dreary hobbies and her complete lack of killer instinct, had been holding him back. His new girlfriend, a vapid but stunningly beautiful Instagram model named Kenzie, was far more suitable for his public image. Kenzie was currently laughing a high, tinkling sound at a joke one of his sycophantic junior partners had made. Damien smiled. Life was good, orderly, profitable. His phone vibrated on the polished marble bar. It was a news alert from a financial journal he followed. The headline made him frown. "Silas Blackwood, reclusive real estate magnate, dead at 88, leaves entire 2.7 B fortune to mystery woman." Damien's interest was piqued. He knew of Blackwood, of course. The man was a legend, an old-world titan who had built his empire in the shadows, never seeking the spotlight. A $2.7 billion inheritance was a seismic event in their world. He tapped the link, idly curious about which socialite or long-lost European royal had hit the jackpot. He scrolled through the article. It detailed Blackwood's major holdings, his legendary privacy, and then he saw the paragraph that made the expensive scotch turn to acid in his stomach. "The sole heir has been identified as Ms. Claire Sterling of San Francisco. Ms. Sterling, recently divorced from tech mogul Damien Thorne, is a former librarian with no known prior connection to Mr. Blackwood. Sources close to the estate's executor confirmed the validity of the will, calling it ironclad. The financial world is abuzz with speculation about the nature of their relationship." The glass nearly slipped from his hand. Claire, his Claire, the mousy, pathetic woman he had just cast aside for nothing. $2.7 billion. The sound of Kenzie's laughter suddenly grated on his ears like nails on a chalkboard. The glittering city lights seemed to mock him. He could feel a hot, volcanic rage building in his chest. It wasn't possible. It was a mistake, a typo. Claire didn't know anyone. She didn't do anything. How could she have possibly ensnared a man like Silas Blackwood? His mind, always calculating, began to spin. He'd underestimated her. While he thought she was quietly fading into oblivion, she must have been plotting this, playing the long game. The quiet librarian, the gentle volunteer, it must have all been an act. A brilliant, diabolical performance to seduce a lonely old billionaire. The audacity of it was almost impressive. But the admiration was quickly consumed by a possessive, blinding fury. That money should have been his, or at least it should have been in his orbit. If she had inherited it while they were married, it would have been a marital asset. He had divorced her 2 weeks too early. The irony was so bitter it made him want to scream. He abruptly stood up, grabbing his coat. "I have to go," he snapped, leaving Kenzie and his partners looking bewildered. He drove his McLaren through the city streets with reckless abandon, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He went straight to her last known address, the pathetic little apartment in the Mission. He buzzed her number relentlessly, then pounded on the door. No answer. Of course not. She was probably already holed up in some 5-star hotel with her lawyer, laughing at him. Finally, he did what he had sworn he would never do again. He called her. It went to voicemail on the first ring. He called again and again. On the 5th try, she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was different, still soft, but without the familiar tremor of fear he was used to hearing. "Claire, it's Damien." He tried to keep his voice level, but the rage was a physical pressure in his throat. There was a long pause. "I know." "What is this? What did you do?" he demanded. "I didn't do anything, Damien." "Don't lie to me," he roared, losing his composure. "You played me. You played all of us. This whole sad, pathetic act while you were cozying up to some decrepit old man, waiting for him to die. How could you be so deceitful?" The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. He expected her to cry, to stammer out a defense. That's what she always did. But the silence stretched on, filled only by his own heavy breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold. It was a tone he had never heard from her before, and it sent an actual chill down his spine. "The man you're talking about was my friend. A kind, decent man who showed me more respect in a few casual conversations than you showed me in 12 years of marriage. This conversation is over." "Claire, don't you dare hang up on me," he snarled. "We need to talk about our future. This changes everything." "No, Damien," she said, and for the first time he heard the faint tremor again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the controlled vibration of suppressed power. "It changes my future. You made it very clear that I am not a part of yours. You were right. It's a clean break." And then she hung up. Damien stared at his phone in stunned disbelief. She had hung up on him. Claire, the woman who used to apologize if he sighed too loudly. The woman who had sat silently in court and let him strip her of everything. The vulture had returned to the carcass, only to find that the carcass had gotten up, sprouted wings of gold, and flown away. And Damien Thorne, for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, had no idea what to do next. The hunt was on. The address Mr. Abernathy gave her was in Pacific Heights, a neighborhood of stately mansions and immaculate gardens perched high above the city. Claire took a taxi, feeling a growing sense of dread as the car climbed the steep, winding roads. She had expected a gaudy palace, a monument to a billionaire's ego. Instead, the taxi pulled up to a handsome, ivy-covered brownstone set back from the street behind a wrought-iron fence. It was large, but it possessed a quiet, understated elegance. It looked less like a mansion and more like a university library. A stern-looking woman in a simple black dress, the housekeeper, let her in. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and she had worked for Silas for 30 years. Her eyes, filled with a grief that was both fresh and profound, held a flicker of suspicion as she looked Claire up and down. Claire couldn't blame her. In Mrs. Gable's eyes, she was the usurper, the mystery woman who had stolen the inheritance. "Mr. Abernathy said you would be coming," Mrs. Gable said, her voice stiff. "He said you are to have full access. Mr. Blackwood's study is this way." The house was silent, filled with the scent of beeswax and old wood. It was immaculate, but it felt lived in. There were books stacked on side tables, a half-finished crossword puzzle on a small desk, a worn armchair by a fireplace. This was a home, not a showroom. The study was clearly the heart of the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, crammed with volumes of every shape and size. 2 comfortable leather chairs sat before a large fireplace, and a massive oak desk was positioned in front of a bay window that offered a stunning panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge. It was a room designed for quiet contemplation. It felt like Silas. "He spent most of his time in here," Mrs. Gable offered, her tone softening slightly as she took in the room. "He said the world made more sense when viewed through a library window." She paused, then looked directly at Claire. "I don't understand any of this. He never mentioned you. Not once." "I don't understand either," Claire answered honestly. "I knew him as a quiet man who loved old books. That's all." Mrs. Gable seemed to consider this for a moment, her gaze searching Claire's face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her. With a small, curt nod, she backed out of the room, leaving Claire alone. Claire felt an almost sacred hush in the room. This was Silas's sanctuary. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books: poetry, history, philosophy, classic novels. They were the books of a man who had sought to understand the world, not just to own it. On the large oak desk, positioned squarely in the center, was a small leather-bound journal. It was different from the others. It looked more personal. Beside it was a small folded note with her name on it. "Claire, this one is for you, S.B." She sat in his large, worn leather chair, which still seemed to hold the faint impression of his body. She opened the journal. The first page was dated just a few weeks after she had stopped coming to the restoration workshop. "She is gone. The quiet woman with the sad eyes has not returned. I feel her absence more than I would have expected. The workshop is dimmer without her. It is a foolish sentiment for a man of my age to feel such a connection to a near stranger, but her presence was a quiet comfort. She asks for nothing, a rare quality. I hope she is well." Claire's breath hitched. He had noticed. He had cared. She turned the page. The entries continued, sporadic at first, then more frequent. He had, as he'd said in his letter, made inquiries. "I have learned her name, Claire Sterling, married to that peacock of the tech world, Damien Thorne. I have seen him in the papers, a man who preens for the camera. He does not seem a suitable match for a woman of her quiet depth. A gilded cage, indeed. I fear for her. Thorne has filed for divorce. The initial reports suggest it will be a brutal affair. He is known for his ruthlessness in business. It is unlikely he will be any kinder in his personal dealings. She has no family to support her. She is alone." As she read on, she began to see the full picture. Silas hadn't just been a passive observer. He had been her silent guardian. The journal entries detailed his growing disgust with Damien's tactics, which he followed through his legal contacts. He wrote about his decision to change his will, a decision that his lawyers, including Mr. Abernathy, had strongly advised against. "Arthur thinks I am being rash, sentimental. He suggests a foundation, a charitable trust. But I am not interested in the sterile philanthropy of my peers. I have spent a lifetime watching money flow to institutions. I want to see what happens when it flows to a single deserving soul. I want to give her back the power that was stolen from her. Power is a tool, and I have seen in her hands the care she takes with broken things. I trust her to mend, not to break." The final entry was from only a few days before his death. "It is done. The papers are signed. I feel a sense of peace I have not felt in years. My father's fortune, which has often felt like a shroud, will now be a key. I will not see what she does with it, but I have faith. She will build something beautiful. I am sure of it." Claire closed the journal, holding it to her chest. The weight of his faith in her was immense, terrifying, and yet liberating. All her life she had been defined by others, as a dutiful daughter, a quiet student, Damien's beautiful wife, a pathetic divorcee. Silas Blackwood was the first person who had defined her by her own character. She looked out the window at the iconic bridge, shrouded in the late afternoon fog. The view was dizzying. For so long, her world had been small, confined to the four walls of her apartment, the four corners of her own mind. Now, the entire world was spread out before her. It was his final gift. Not the money, not the house, but this, a new perspective. A chance to see herself as he had seen her, strong, capable, worthy. A quiet resolve settled over her. The fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a nascent sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about honoring the legacy of the kind, lonely man who had seen her when she was invisible. Damien wanted a fight. He would get one. But she wouldn't be fighting for the money. She would be fighting for Silas. She would be fighting for herself. The media storm broke with the force of a tsunami. The story was irresistible. The scorned ex-wife, left with nothing, who suddenly becomes one of the wealthiest women in the world overnight. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment building, their long-lensed cameras like sniper rifles aimed at her life. Tabloid headlines screamed with speculation. Was she a brilliant mastermind, a seductive schemer, an innocent victim of circumstance? She became a blank canvas onto which the public projected all their fantasies about wealth, luck, and revenge. Claire, guided by Mr. Abernathy, moved into Silas's Pacific Heights home. The house, with its thick walls and gated privacy, became her fortress against the siege. Mr. Abernathy hired a security detail and a public relations firm to handle the deluge of media requests. Claire's life, once defined by its smallness, was now a corporate enterprise. Damien, true to form, did not stay quiet. He launched his own counter-offensive through the press. He gave a carefully worded interview to a prominent financial magazine, painting a picture of a troubled, manipulative woman. "I loved Claire deeply," he said, his face a mask of sorrowful sincerity. "But she was always searching for something more. I built a wonderful life for us, but it was never enough. She became withdrawn, secretive. This connection with Mr. Blackwood, it explains a lot. I feel betrayed, of course, but mostly I just feel sad for her. And frankly, I'm concerned. A woman of her fragile emotional state is not equipped to handle this kind of fortune. I see it as my duty, as someone who still cares for her, to ensure that Silas Blackwood's legacy is managed responsibly." It was a masterful performance. He was the concerned ex-husband, the noble victim. He was laying the groundwork for his real attack. A week later, Mr. Abernathy called her into the study. He held a sheaf of legal documents, his expression grim. "He's filed a lawsuit," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice clipped with disdain. "He's contesting the will." Claire's heart sank. "On what grounds?" "Flimsy ones. He's claiming that you exerted undue influence over Mr. Blackwood. Furthermore, he's petitioning the court to have a significant portion of the estate placed into a trust, which he, of course, would benevolently oversee. His argument is that since your alleged relationship with Blackwood began during your marriage to him, the inheritance is a direct result of opportunities afforded to you as his wife, and is therefore, in essence, a marital asset he is entitled to." The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was trying to claim ownership of her friendship with Silas, a friendship that had only flourished because she was seeking refuge from him. The old Claire would have crumbled. The old Claire would have been terrified of another court battle, another public humiliation. But as she sat in Silas's chair, surrounded by his books and his quiet strength, she felt a cold anger solidify within her. "He will not touch Silas's legacy," she said, her voice low and steady. "He will not tarnish his name to satisfy his own greed. We fight him, with everything we have." Mr. Abernathy allowed himself a small, approving smile. "Excellent. I have already assembled the best litigation team in the state. Mr. Thorne has mistaken your quiet nature for weakness. It is a mistake he will come to regret." The battle began. It was a war waged not with weapons, but with depositions, motions, and character assassinations. Damien's lawyers were ruthless. They subpoenaed her financial records from before the inheritance, revealing her poverty. They deposed the volunteers at the book bindery, trying to twist her quiet friendship with Silas into something sordid and transactional. They painted her as a predator who had targeted a vulnerable old man. Claire, however, was no longer the silent woman in the courtroom. Flanked by her own formidable legal team, she faced the depositions with a calm dignity that infuriated Damien's lawyers. "Miss Sterling, isn't it true you were deeply in debt when you met Mr. Blackwood?" one of them asked during a grueling 7-hour session. "I had very little money, yes," Claire replied calmly. "My ex-husband left me with nothing." "And you saw an opportunity, did you not? A lonely old man with billions of dollars." Claire met his gaze without flinching. "I saw a kind soul who loved books. We discussed 18th century binding techniques and the poetry of John Keats. His finances were never mentioned. I didn't even know he had any." Her sincerity was her best defense. It was impossible to fake the genuine affection and respect she had for Silas. Every attempt Damien's team made to paint her as a schemer was undercut by her steadfast, dignified testimony. But the fight was taking its toll. The constant scrutiny, the endless legal maneuvering, the public nature of the battle. It was exhausting. One evening, feeling overwhelmed, she retreated to the study with Silas's personal journal. She read his words again, searching for guidance. "Power is a tool. I trust her to mend, not to break." She realized then that she had been playing defense. She had been reacting to Damien's attacks, trying to protect Silas's memory and her own character. But that wasn't enough. Silas hadn't given her this power just to build walls. He had given it to her to build a new life. Mending wasn't just about preservation, it was about creation. An idea began to form in her mind, a way to fight back that wasn't on Damien's terms, a way to honor Silas that went beyond fending off lawsuits. She picked up the phone and called Mr. Abernathy. "Arthur," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I need you to arrange a press conference. It's time I stopped letting Damien Thorne tell my story. It's time I told my own." The press conference was held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel. The room was packed, a chaotic sea of cameras, microphones and reporters, all hungry for a piece of the story. Claire, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, walked to the podium with a composure that surprised even herself. The blinding flash of camera bulbs was a physical assault, but she didn't flinch. She remembered Damien in these moments, basking in the attention like a lizard soaking up the sun. For her, it was simply a means to an end. She didn't read from a prepared statement. She spoke from the heart, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the sound system. "For the past several weeks, you have all written and spoken a great deal about me," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. "You've called me a gold digger, a schemer, a mystery woman. My ex-husband has called me emotionally fragile and manipulative. He is trying to portray my friendship with a kind, honorable man as a sordid transaction. He is doing this because he believes he is entitled to something that is not his. This is a pattern of behavior for him." A murmur went through the room. This was not the defensive posture they had expected. "I am not here today to talk about my divorce or my personal life," she continued. "I am here to talk about Silas Blackwood's legacy." Silas believed in the power of art, history, and literature to elevate the human spirit. He believed in quiet, diligent work. He believed in restoring things that were broken. To honor his memory and to use the incredible gift he has given me, I am announcing the formation of the Blackwood Foundation for Arts and Humanities. She laid out her vision. The foundation would provide grants to underfunded libraries, museums, and restoration workshops, places just like the one where she met Silas. It would fund scholarships for students in the humanities. Its first major project would be to purchase and permanently endow the Historical Society and book bindery where her new life had begun. Silas Blackwood's fortune will not be squandered in courtrooms or hoarded in bank accounts, she concluded. her voice ringing with conviction. It will be used to mend, to build, and to preserve the things he held dear. That is his true will, and I intend to see it carried out. The announcement was a strategic masterstroke. It reframed the narrative completely. She was no longer a passive recipient of a windfall. She was an active steward of a legacy. The story shifted from a tawdry tale of money and betrayal to one of philanthropy and purpose. Public opinion, a fickle and powerful beast, began to swing decisively in her favor. Damien was apoplectic. Claire's move had made him look petty and grasping. His lawsuit, once framed as a noble effort to protect a legacy, now looked like a naked cash grab. But he was not a man who retreated. He ordered his legal team to double down, to dig deeper, to find something he could use to destroy her. But Claire was no longer just playing defense. The press conference had awakened something in her, a sense of agency, a taste for the offensive. Inspired by Silas's journals, she wondered about the man Damien truly was, beyond the polished public image. Silas had seen him as a peacock, a man who preened for the camera. What was behind the feathers? On a hunch, she contacted Mr. Abernathy with a new request. Arthur, Silas mentioned in his journals that he had legal contacts who kept him informed about Damien's divorce tactics. I want to hire the best private investigator you can find. I want to know everything about Damien Thorne's business. Not the polished version he presents to shareholders, but the real version. Mr. Abernathy, sensing the shift in her, complied without question. He hired a woman named Lena Petrova, a former investigative journalist with a reputation for being relentless and discreet. Lena's investigation started quietly. She began with Thorne Industries' public financials, then started digging into shell corporations, offshore accounts, and supply chains. For weeks there was nothing but a series of frustrating dead ends. Damien was good at covering his tracks. But then Lena found a loose thread. A disgruntled former CFO of a smaller tech company that Thorne Industries had acquired in a hostile takeover 2 years prior. The man had been forced to sign an ironclad NDA, but Lena, using a combination of charm and a promise of anonymous protection, convinced him to talk. The story he told was ugly. Damien's meteoric rise wasn't just due to innovation and business acumen. It was built on a foundation of stolen intellectual property, insider trading, and a particularly nasty scheme involving a pump and dump of his own company's stock, which had enriched him and his inner circle while wiping out the retirement funds of hundreds of small, unsuspecting investors. The former CFO had the documentation to prove it. Lena brought the evidence to Claire. It was all there, in black and white: falsified reports, illegal wire transfers, damning email chains. It was a portrait of a man consumed by a pathological greed, a man who would crush anyone to get what he wanted. He hadn't just discarded her, he had built his entire empire on discarding people. Claire stared at the files spread across Silas's desk. This was it. This was the end of him. She could go to the SEC, she could go to the press, she could utterly destroy him, tear down the entire edifice of his life, just as he had torn down hers. The power in her hands was absolute. The thought brought a surge of cold, thrilling adrenaline. Revenge. It was a tempting, intoxicating poison. She could picture his face, the smug confidence wiped away, replaced by panic and fear. It was everything she had dreamed of in her darkest moments in that lonely little apartment. But then she looked around the study, at the books filled with centuries of human wisdom and folly. She thought of Silas's words, "I trust her to mend, not to break." To release this information would be an act of demolition. It would be an explosion, and explosions leave rubble, hurting the innocent as well as the guilty. The employees of Thorne Industries. The market itself. It would be a messy, destructive act. It would be something Damien would do. She realized, with startling clarity, that true power wasn't about destruction. It was about control. It was about choosing not to use the weapon in your hand. She now had the means to end the war, not just win a single battle. She picked up the phone, but it wasn't the SEC she was calling. It was Damien's private number. "Damien," she said when he answered, his voice wary. "We need to talk, in person. No lawyers." She told him the place and the time, then hung up before he could respond. The final confrontation would not be in a courtroom or a boardroom. It would be on her turf, in the heart of Silas Blackwood's library. Damien arrived at the Pacific Heights house exactly on time. Punctuality was a tenet of his religion of control. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, a piece of armor for the battle he was about to face. He expected to see a team of lawyers, a calculated ambush. Instead, Mrs. Gable led him silently through the quiet house to the study where Claire was waiting alone. She was standing by the large bay window, looking out at the fog rolling in over the bay. She didn't turn as he entered. The room was just as he had imagined, a stuffy, old-world cliché. He felt a surge of contempt for the dead man who had caused all this chaos. "So this is the inner sanctum," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The place where you and the old man hatched your little scheme. It's quite the setting for a shakedown, Claire. I assume your lawyers are hiding behind the curtains?" Claire finally turned to face him. She wasn't wearing a power suit or a dress designed to intimidate. She was in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. She looked comfortable, at ease. It was this unnerving calm that set him on edge more than any legal threat could. "There are no lawyers, Damien," she said, her voice quiet but resonant in the book-lined room. "This isn't about the lawsuit. That's just a symptom. This is about the disease." She gestured to the two leather armchairs by the cold fireplace. "Please, sit." He remained standing, crossing his arms. "I prefer to stand. Say what you have to say. I have a dinner meeting." Claire gave a small, sad smile. "You always have a dinner meeting." She didn't press the issue. She walked over to Silas's massive oak desk. On its polished surface was a single slim file folder. She picked it up and held it. "When we were married," she began, her tone conversational, "I used to wonder how you did it. How you were always one step ahead. How your gambles always paid off. I thought it was brilliance. I was so proud of you." Damien's jaw tightened. "Get to the point." "The point," she said, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly, "is that it wasn't brilliance. It was fraud." She opened the folder. She didn't show it to him. She just began to speak, her voice calm and methodical. She detailed the hostile takeover of a company called Heir Systems. She named the former CFO. She quoted dates and figures related to the insider trading that preceded the acquisition. She mentioned offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She spoke of the illegal stock manipulation scheme, even naming two of the small-time investors whose life savings had been wiped out. She recited the facts without malice, like a historian recounting a series of unfortunate events. With every word, another layer of Damien's armor peeled away. His confident posture began to stiffen. The color drained from his face. His carefully constructed world was being dismantled, piece by piece, by the quiet, methodical voice of the woman he had called nothing. "How?" he finally choked out, the single word a croak of disbelief. "How do you know this?" "You underestimated me, Damien," she said simply. "You always did. You thought my world was small. You thought my interests were trivial. You never considered that I might learn to use the tools you understand: money, information, power. Silas gave me the resources, but you gave me the motivation." She closed the folder and placed it back on the desk. "This file contains everything. The documentation, the bank records, the sworn testimony. Copies have been made, of course. They are in very safe hands." He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. The silence in the room was thick with his unraveling. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, was a maelstrom of panic. SEC investigations, jail time, the end of his empire, the end of him. "What do you want?" he finally whispered, his voice stripped of all its arrogance. It was the voice of a cornered animal. "Money? You already have all the money in the world. This was the moment, the climax of it all. She could lay out her terms of surrender. She could demand a public apology. She could force him to his knees. But looking at him now, seeing the pathetic, terrified man behind the facade of the Titan, she felt nothing but a profound, weary pity. Revenge was a hollow victory. "Want?" she repeated softly. "I don't want anything from you, Damien. That's the entire point. I am finally free of wanting anything from you." She walked back to the window, turning her back on him. "Tomorrow morning, I want to see a letter of dismissal for your lawsuit on Mr. Abernathy's desk. You will drop all claims against Silas Blackwood's estate. You will never speak my name or his name in public again. You will walk away, and you will disappear from my life forever." "And if I don't?" he asked, a desperate flicker of his old defiance. Claire looked over her shoulder, her eyes holding his. "Then I will give this folder to the New York Times. And I will let the world see the kind of man you really are. Not a brilliant builder, but a common thief." She held his gaze, and in that moment, the power dynamic that had defined their lives for 12 years was not just reversed, it was annihilated. He was the one who was nothing, a hollow man built of stolen parts. He stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He saw no loophole, no angle to play. He was utterly and completely beaten. He gave a single jerky nod, a gesture of absolute defeat. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the study, his footsteps no longer the confident click of a victor, but the shuffling retreat of a ghost. Claire watched him go. She listened until the sound of the front door closing echoed through the quiet house. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel joy. She felt still. The storm had passed. The war was over. She looked down at the file on the desk, the weapon she had chosen not to fire. She picked it up, walked over to the cold fireplace, and dropped it inside. She had no need for it anymore. She was finally, truly free. Claire's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most profound strength. She went from being a ghost in her own life to the architect of a lasting legacy, not through vengeance, but through dignity and purpose. She found that true power isn't about destroying your enemies, but about having the strength to build something beautiful in the ruins they left behind. Her journey from silence to significance is one of betrayal, incredible resilience, and ultimately redemption. If Claire's story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of the human spirit to overcome adversity, please take a moment to hit the like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of hope and strength. And of course, subscribe to our channel for more deep dive stories like this one. What did you think of Claire's final decision? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thanks for watching.